In 1857, Thomas Whaley built a two-story red brick house in Old Town San Diego, calling it the finest house in Southern California. At first, it served as a family home, a general store, a courthouse, and even a small theater. But just a few years later, it became the center of strange, supernatural occurrences. The Whaley family constantly heard heavy footsteps, children's laughter, and felt the unsettling sensation of being watched inside their own home. Locals believed the house was cursed, as it had been built directly over the site where James "Yankee Jim" Robinson, a notorious horse thief, had been publicly hanged in 1852. Whaley had once dismissed the idea as mere superstition, but the increasingly disturbing events eventually led him to question it. Flickering lights, mysterious perfume scents, and fleeting shadows in mirrors turned the house from a source of pride into a symbol of dread, where death itself seemed unwilling to let go. In the mid-19th century, Old Town San Diego was still a primitive settlement, where law and order were often enforced with violence and blood. Before the Whaley House was ever built, the land had been used for public executions, its most infamous victim being James "Yankee Jim" Robinson, who was sentenced to hang in 1852. Thomas Whaley knew the history of the land well. He had even witnessed Yankee Jim's hanging when he was still a young immigrant from New York. But with a modern mind and firm belief in science, he dismissed all ghost stories as foolish myths. To him, this was a business opportunity, cheap land, prime location, and plenty of potential for profit. His wife, Anna, was more cautious. From the very first days of moving in, she felt a coldness that didn't come from the weather in the rooms. Their infant son, Thomas Jr., would scream uncontrollably at night. The housemaid quit without explanation. Yet Whaley stubbornly insisted it was all coincidence. He didn't realize he had built his home right on the thin border between the living and the dead, and once that door cracked open, the past would not easily lie still. Pushing aside all doubts, Thomas Whaley turned his house into a bustling hub in a barren land. The ground floor became a general store. The upper floors were used for family living, and the second floor was converted into a courtroom, even serving at times as a stage for theatrical performances. He opened his doors to the public, welcoming lawyers, merchants, and artists alike. To outsiders, the Whaley House stood as a beacon of modernity and progress amid a rugged frontier. But the more people came, the more inexplicable things began to happen. During trials, witnesses claimed they saw silent figures standing in the hallway, though no one had entered. Actors on stage heard applause from empty seats. Oil lamps snuffed themselves out mid-performance, and picture frames fell from the walls without the slightest breeze. A priest was once invited to examine the house. He fell silent the moment he stepped inside. He didn't perform any rituals. He simply said one sentence before walking out: "There is something here that does not belong to this world." Though the house's reputation spread far and wide, it was no longer seen as a symbol of success. It slowly became a whisper traded at the marketplace. There's something wrong with the Whaley House. The strange footsteps gradually became a familiar sound. Doors slammed shut in the middle of the night. Cries echoed from empty hallways. Amid this heavy atmosphere, the Whaley family began to suffer irreversible losses. First came the death of young Thomas Jr., their firstborn son, who passed away from scarlet fever. Not long after, the store was vandalized, the courthouse relocated, their income dried up. Anna, Thomas's wife, fell into a deep depression. She began talking to the woman in white who stands in the dining room, whom no one else could see. The greatest tragedy befell Violet Whaley, their second daughter. After a hasty and betrayed marriage, Violet fell into despair. In 1885, she walked into the backyard carrying a pistol and ended her life at the age of 22. Violet's death left a fracture that never healed among the remaining family members. Thomas Whaley, the man who once saw the house as his American dream, now sat silently, eyes always distant. Locals whispered that they saw a young girl in a white dress standing at the second-floor window at midnight, looking down at the empty street. No one in the family spoke of Violet anymore, but from that moment on, the house no longer belonged to the living. After Violet's death, the Whaley house ceased to be a permanent home. The remaining family members gradually moved out, leaving behind a cold, decaying house, rotting wood, dusty curtains. Yet, at that very moment, a new kind of life began, drawn in by curiosity, superstition, and the hunt for the paranormal. By the early 20th century, mystics, mediums, and even local law enforcement began to investigate. They followed rumors of the woman in white gliding down the stairs, and children's laughter heard at night, though no one was there. Some teams brought audio recorders, thermometers, and compasses to measure disturbances in energy. Many strange phenomena were recorded, shadowy figures captured in mirrors, voices from the second floor, unclear but undeniably human. A bone-chilling cold that seeped into your spine upon entering the old courtroom. One audio tape from 1960, never publicly released, captured the sobs of a woman and a whispered plea. "Don't leave me. I'm sorry, Father." Even police officers who visited the home refused to return. One wrote in his report, "There were no signs of forced entry, but when I stepped inside, I felt I was not alone." The Whaley House no longer needs to be told. It tells its own story, through whispers, through sudden drops in temperature, and through the way it forces the living to look back and ask, do the dead ever truly rest? There's a strange detail that few people notice. The second floor of the Whaley House once served as San Diego's very first courtroom. It was here that death sentences were signed, land disputes were ruled on, and even some deeply questionable verdicts were handed down. Locals believe that fact alone left a kind of sacred fracture in the building, turning the Whaley House into a place where justice and restless spirits intersect. Historical records show that the courtroom once ruled on a land ownership dispute involving the very plot where Yankee Jim was executed. It was also here that public officials at the time turned a blind eye to complaints from displaced indigenous residents, silencing them not with solutions, but with verdicts. Today, that courtroom is used as a sitting room, but the sound of gavels slamming and judgments being spoken still echoes in the minds of those brave enough to stand there alone. Years later, when the city decided to restore the Whaley House as a museum, a civil legal team proposed to reconstruct its legal history. But after exactly 3 nights of staying inside the house for research, the team withdrew without releasing any findings. Only one member spoke to the press, eyes sunken and sleepless. "We uncovered something we were never meant to find. Some verdicts should never be reopened." Whaley House, once a proud symbol of San Diego's legal order, has now become a stark reminder of a broken justice. A place where the law was once enforced with a wooden gavel, and now continues through the sound of knocking doors in the middle of the night. Today, the Whaley House is the most popular tourist attraction in Old Town San Diego. People line up to step inside, to hear tour guides retell ghost stories, or even to join late-night paranormal investigations. But behind the flash photography and eerie whispers, the house still keeps the one thing that makes it truly terrifying: the silence of the dead. Some visitors still break down in tears for no apparent reason when stepping into Violet Whaley's bedroom. Some cameras mysteriously shut down when pointed at the second-floor hallway. Some smell perfume out of thin air, even though everyone in the group is wearing a mask. And each year, at least a few guests refuse to complete the tour, claiming, "Someone was watching me from the upstairs window." No matter how many times it's repainted, rewired, relit, or re-equipped with cameras, the Whaley House has never returned to what it once was. No one truly lives there anymore, but what once lived never really left. There's a joke among San Diego locals, one that no one actually laughs at. If you leave the Whaley House and still hear footsteps behind you, don't turn around. It'll know you've noticed it. What remains inside is not just a haunting, it's the residue of a society that once believed pain was the price of order. The Whaley House isn't haunted. It is a living memory of injustices never forgiven. May 2015. Tom Maxwell, former member of the renowned swing band Squirrel Nut Zippers, shut the door of his old pickup truck and glanced one last time over his shoulder at the house he once believed was a dream. No farewell, no valuable belongings brought along. Only his wife, her face pale and worn from sleepless nights, and their young daughter, clutching a tattered teddy bear, sat silently beside him. They left just as the sun began to set, as if afraid that something might catch up with them if they lingered another moment. The house had a name, Poplar Hill, a stately southern manor nestled deep beneath the trees of Hillsborough, North Carolina. Built in 1794, it had stood for more than 2 centuries, once home to Julian Carr, a real-life tobacco magnate and politician infamous for his public declarations supporting white supremacy and racial segregation. Carr once stood before a crowd and proudly proclaimed that he had nearly beaten a black man to death to defend the honor of a white woman. Maxwell, a liberal, nostalgic soul, longing for peace and a new start for his family, was captivated by Poplar Hill's quiet, graceful charm. He either didn't know, or chose to ignore, the darkness in its past. No one warned him about the price of living in a place that had witnessed so much blood and grief. There was no sign at the gate, no caution from the real estate agent. But he quickly realized, sometimes the most terrifying thing doesn't make a sound. Poplar Hill didn't slam doors, it didn't scream, it didn't flicker lights like in Hollywood films. Instead, it seeped into your mind, little by little, night after night, until you no longer knew what was real, what was imagined, or who you were. Poplar Hill, a name that sounded as if it came from a folk poem, wasn't just a house, it was a symbol, a monument that had survived generations, standing still beneath the ancient trees of North Carolina. But like many old Southern structures, it carried a past no one wanted to talk about. The most infamous figure to have lived in Poplar Hill was Julian Carr, a late 19th century tobacco baron and radical politician. Carr made no attempt to hide his racist beliefs. He once publicly claimed to have disciplined a black man with violence in the name of protecting Southern honor. His name was tied to Ku Klux Klan activity, post-Civil War suppression campaigns, and controversial landmarks, including the Silent Sam statue that was removed in 2018. It was in that very context that Tom Maxwell, a progressive musician known for his anti-war and anti-injustice songs, unwittingly stepped into the heart of a historical ghost. He didn't buy the house because of Carr. He bought it for the old wood, the wide porch, the sense of belonging. But some places are not meant for redemption. Poplar Hill didn't want to be forgiven. It wanted to be remembered. From the moment they moved in, Tom felt something was off, but he couldn't put it into words. The house felt like it had memory, emotion, even a kind of quiet hostility. Some rooms were colder than others. Every night at exactly 3 a.m., footsteps echoed on the main staircase. Sometimes, he'd find his wife staring out the window for hours, only for her to say later she didn't remember why. Instead of asking questions, they chose to adapt. Tom tried to explain things logically. Old house, that's all. We're probably just stressed from moving. Maybe it's sound bouncing off somewhere. But the explanations grew thinner with each passing day, because there's no logic that explains why a portrait on the wall kept turning itself away every morning. At first, it was all small things. Doors slamming shut without reason, lights flickering even though the wiring was new, objects moving from place to place with no one remembering touching them. Tom still reassured himself, it's just the wind, old house stuff. But eventually, even that no longer comforted him. One early winter night, Tom was upstairs when he heard water running in the bathroom. He walked in to find the shower on. He turned it off and closed the door, but as he walked away, the sound came back, again, from behind him. This time the water was flowing, and the mirror was fogged over, as if someone had just taken a hot shower. And in that mist, he saw it. A small handprint pressed firmly against the glass. His daughter, around 9 years old at the time, began to complain, "There's an old lady standing in my room." Tom's wife kept waking up in the middle of the night, startled by knocks at the door, but whenever she opened it, there was no one there. Then one night, she screamed from the bathroom. 3 long scratches ran across her back, bleeding lightly. There were no sharp objects in the room, no explanation. Tom began keeping a journal of the incidents. He installed cameras, motion sensors, audio recorders. But the data was strange. Devices would shut off exactly when something happened, or they'd record bizarre sounds, whispers, dragging footsteps, or a woman singing a lullaby, even when the entire family was asleep. The breaking point came when Tom took a family photo in the living room, just a simple, happy shot. But when he looked at it later, he saw a man wearing a hood, standing behind his wife. No clear face, eyes pitch black, his dark clothing nearly blended into the wall. But none of the three remembered seeing anyone when the photo was taken. After that, the atmosphere changed. Gone was the vague unease. Now it was a presence. Something, or someone, was living with them. Not a guest, a host. Tom remained stubborn. He believed he could figure it out, that he could observe it, record it, write about it, turn it into art. But he didn't understand. Poplar Hill wasn't a script. It was a living entity, and it had awakened. Even in fear, Tom tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. He believed that sticking to routines and not provoking the force might make things settle down. But maybe that attitude, the quiet submission, the non-resistance, was exactly what let the house seep deeper into them. His wife, once strong and rational, began to unravel. She'd sit for hours at the window, staring silently into the dark backyard, as if waiting for someone. Every night, she had the same nightmare, a woman with long black hair, wearing a dark robe, standing at the foot of the bed, whispering, "I'm not leaving, I was here first." Their daughter became withdrawn, afraid of light. She stopped laughing. One day, she drew a pencil sketch, a crooked roofed house, 3 people inside, and a 4th figure with no face, standing behind them. Tom turned to a network of people who had researched haunted houses in the American South. A middle-aged woman who had worked on similar cases offered to visit. But the moment she stepped through the front door, she froze. She didn't say a word. She turned around and left. A week later, she sent a message. "I couldn't cross the threshold. Something is guarding that place. I'm not the one it wants." The pressure mounted. His wife began talking about separation. "You can stay and write music with ghosts, but our daughter shouldn't grow up with that." Tom was furious. He refused to accept it. He believed he was close to understanding it. He trusted his intellect, the fatal mistake of those who try to reason with the irrational. Then one night, drunk and desperate, Tom broke open the basement door, a place no one in the family had dared to enter. Inside was only bare, mildewed brick, but in one corner there was a mark on the wooden floor, a broken salt circle. At the center lay a folded old dress, stained dark red. He told no one, but from that night on, everything changed. Each morning, the basement door stood open. Cold air crept through the house, even though all the windows were shut, and his wife's dreams changed. "I know your husband saw me. I know he touched my things." Tom no longer had the patience to wait for experts. He buried himself in folklore, protective rituals, salt lines, and ancient writings about sealing spirit gateways. Every night, he lined the bed, the doorways, the stairs with salt, following instructions from obscure forums, anonymous blogs, and digital whispers about banishing malevolent energy. And that's when Poplar Hill got angry. The first night after the salt ritual, his wife woke up gasping, unable to breathe. The air in the bedroom felt heavy, as if someone was sitting on her chest. At exactly 3:13 a.m., his daughter woke up cold and rigid, eyes wide open, and said aloud, "She doesn't like the salt. She wants it gone." The surveillance devices Tom had installed around the house began to capture hazy images, dark masses moving across camera angles, impossible to explain by lighting or physical movement. One infrared camera placed outside the basement spontaneously exploded. The circuit was burned from the inside out, but the battery remained intact. Tom sent the footage to a friend who had once worked in paranormal imaging. After watching it, the man replied with just one sentence: "Turn everything off. Don't try to make it appear. There are things cameras aren't meant to see." One night, Tom decided to try communicating with the presence in the house. He read aloud an old Latin passage, a burial rite meant to guide lost spirits. The moment he finished the last line, every light in the house went out. Not a power outage, but one bulb after another bursting, as if each had been strangled into silence. The next morning, Tom found wet footprints stretching from the basement door all the way to his daughter's bedroom. There had been no rain. No one had entered the house. And the most chilling part, the footprints stopped at her bedside. No returning trail. Poplar Hill didn't want to talk. It didn't need to prove its existence. It knew one thing. Tom believed. And belief was the final door it needed to open. In May 2015, Tom Maxwell and his family officially left Poplar Hill. There was no lawsuit, no press release, no trial for justice. Because who would stand trial? A house, a buried history, or memory itself? They moved into a smaller, quieter home, bringing nothing from Poplar Hill with them. No paintings, no old chairs, not even the piano once placed in the living room. Anything that had touched it was left behind, or burned. But the consequences didn't stay behind. Tom's wife underwent psychological treatment for months, plagued by insomnia, panic attacks, and PTSD symptoms. Their daughter, once lively, became withdrawn, afraid of the dark, and never again slept alone. Tom didn't escape either. Even after leaving, every night he dreamed of Poplar Hill. But with one difference. In his dreams, he stood outside, watching through the basement window, while his family was still inside, still trapped. No one in the legal or scientific community came forward to verify his story. An old house, some footprints, malfunctioning devices, all deemed insufficient evidence. The modern legal system has no statutes for the undefined, but there was one thing Tom did keep: fear, not loud, not dramatic, but slow, persistent, like the way Poplar Hill had haunted him, and maybe still does. Years after leaving Poplar Hill, Tom Maxwell documented everything in a long-form article titled "We Salted Nanny," an attempt to finally face what had happened. He described everything in detail: footsteps, scratch marks, the blood-stained dress in the basement, and even the things no one believed, like the footprints that went nowhere, or the shadow in their family photo. When asked why he continued to write about it, Tom gave only one answer: "I have to tell it. If I don't, it'll keep living, inside me." The house, Poplar Hill, was never torn down, never abandoned. It was renovated by a new family who claimed they had never experienced anything unusual. But 1 year later, the wife in that family was hospitalized for acute paranoid delusions. The records were sealed. No one spoke of the house again. Tom never declared that his home had been haunted in the supernatural sense. He didn't claim to have seen ghosts, nor did he sensationalize the experience. But he insisted that the house had very real effects on the mental health, emotions, and safety of his family in ways that no academic language could fully describe. In the final part of his article, he didn't call himself a victim. He didn't place blame on anyone. Instead, he ended with a bitter acknowledgement of his own arrogance. Walking into a place burdened with centuries of pain, believing he could somehow manage it. We came to care for it, but Poplar Hill didn't need us. Maybe it doesn't need anyone. There is no clear answer, no neat conclusion, and perhaps that's what makes it more haunting than anything that can be explained.